Care is what you do with your heart and your hands mostly. And the peace that I'm talking about is a dynamic peace that you get when you care. Compassiviste is awesome because when I first saw that word, I said, thank you, because that's a word that goes along with care for peace. Care is a feeling, but if you don't do anything with care, then what's the point?
Compassion would mean to stop and do something about it so that you can relieve the suffering of that person. So like you say, the word care, the word compassion, all of these words that we ascribe to feelings in a linguistic description throw us off that path that we should be on, because it stops us from evolving into the person who becomes dynamic, who becomes, I need to act on my emotions. And so when I came up with Compassiviste, it really was exactly what you're describing. And it's basically, I need to act. I need to act on those emotions of care, of compassion, of love, of kindness, of collectiveness and all of that.
I don't even think about the sixth extinction. I think about the next step. The cover of my book says, "To Care for Peace, a global mandate to secure the second human evolution in perpetuity." That's the discussion. To care for peace, you got to recognize that you got it in your heart. And the second human evolution is what we need to be doing right now. There's nothing about the extinction.
If you're willing to see yourself beyond that extinction space, and if you're willing to see yourself at an active space where you're doing something about it, that's where this conversation is. And that's really empowering to the audience, because I think what everybody's going to take from this is stop looking at the fear factors and the negatives and all of the ways that we're going to die and all the ways that you're going to be extinct, and start thinking about what you can do about it and how you can do what you can do. Welcome to Compassiviste Dialogues. I'm your host, Ali Horiat. My goal in this program is to educate our audience about various global issues and how we can help. My guest today is Jeffrey Charles Hardy, a 40-year veteran of the healthcare system, service, and facility planning and design consultant. He's the president and founder of Care for Peace, a nonprofit corporation based in Novato, California. He is a recognized healthcare industry leader, writer, lecturer, speaker, and obviously podcast and television guest. Following the release of U.S. sanctions in 2012, Jeffrey began work with the Myanmar Ministry of Health, the People's Health Foundation, the Reconciling Association, and the University of Virginia Center for Telemedicine to fund, plan, and build the first prototype community development and health center that will be supported by a televideo connected micro healthcare network for at least 250 rural townships and villages where about 3/4 of the people live with little to no healthcare. So, hello, Jeffrey. Welcome to Compassiviste Dialogues.
Hello, Ali. Thank you very much. That was a great speech you just made. How can I beat that?
Well, it's all based on facts, so it's all you. Now, I want to start with, I normally don't start with this. I start with a background of the person, but what really caught my eye from your work was the Care for Peace Manifesto. Can we start with that? Can you tell me what that is about and how you were inspired to write that?
Well, the word manifesto is overused, and actually I completely changed the cover so that word is not on the front cover anymore. And that's simply because I really want people to get involved in the discussion, not in what a book says to them. So I think I really have to start out by saying that the book is about a planning process that I learned over a 50-year period in a healthcare environment. I learned how to build hospitals and plan and build hospitals. I learned how to work with teams of people who came from all over the world to help plan and build a hospital. And it was only during that time that I said, gee, don't we need to do this for the whole world? I mean, don't we need to plan? And then I came up with this idea called the second human evolution, which required me to describe the first human evolution and the suspended human evolution that I think we're in right now. And then how do we plan the second human evolution? And it really starts with the recognition that care for peace sounds so simple, and yet it's even more basic than simple, because care is what you do with your heart and your hands mostly. And the peace that I'm talking about is a dynamic peace that you get when you care. And so all this stuff is things for us to talk about. And that's really what I wanted to do. I wanted to throw out hey guys, we've got to do what I call pre-planning. We got to pre-plan. Which is talking, which frankly is what you're doing. What you're doing is igniting this conversation called pre-planning. Compassiviste, am I saying that right?
Yeah, you're saying that
awesome.
Right.
Is awesome, because when I first saw that word, I said, thank you, because that's a word that goes along with care for peace. Care is a feeling, but if you don't do anything with care, then what's the point? So it's with your hands. And if the peace is your idea of what you have after a war or between two wars, peace is between two wars, or peace is what you get when you're sitting on top of a mountain, with your arms and your legs crossed while the people down below in the valley are suffering. No, that's not the peace. The peace we're talking about here is a compassiviste peace that we need to have. So it's not a manifesto at all. We need to create that manifesto that is no longer on the front cover of the book.
And, I often say something very similar to what you just said. I tell people in my own transition, because I come from a background in a world of cutthroat capitalism, working, managing a fund. And I remember walking out of my office and seeing, say, homeless people sitting there. And I would say, oh, it's cold, it's freezing, they must be cold. And I would walk right back past them. And a lot of people said, oh, Ali's so compassionate, he always feels for them. And now I start thinking that was not compassion. That was a portion of the compassion, because compassion would mean to stop and do something about it so that you can relieve the suffering of that person. So like you say, the word care, the word compassion, all of these words that we ascribe to feelings in a linguistic description throw us off that path that we should be on, because it stops us from evolving into the person who becomes dynamic, who becomes, I need to act on my emotions. And so when I came up with Compassiviste, it really was exactly what you're describing. And it's basically, I need to act. I need to act on those emotions of care, of compassion, of love, of kindness, of, collectiveness and all of that. So, again, when I heard about you, I was thinking, there are so many people in the world who are on the same thought process, and basically we just need to bring it all together, like you said, have those conversations so we can start acting. Can you explain for the audience the first and second human evolutions briefly, so that they kind of get a gist of what you're talking about here?
Well, for a start, the first and second human evolution, the part between the suspended human evolution, these are things that I came up with, and it's not the Holocene, which is a geographic term. And it's not the Anthropocene, which the people who are the Holocene people are arguing with the Anthropocene people about, what's important, when in fact, I think that if we're talking about the human evolution, I'm just talking about Homo sapiens. I'm not even talking about, the dogs and the cats. I'm just talking about how humanity has, in the last 2.5 million years, evolved. And have we become more civilized? Have we become less prone to killing each other and more prone to caring about each other. I mean, hey, simple stuff here. So since I came up with this crazy idea of the first second, I had to define it. And so I was talking to people actually in Myanmar, and I said, well, in my opinion, the first human evolution ended sometime in the mid 60s, because in the mid 60s we had between mid 50s and mid 60s, somewhere in there. Can't put your finger on it, but it's when the mutually assured destruction was known, where we pretty much knew that the world was round because we had circumnavigated a few times, and we knew that there were other countries, and that when we started walking towards the horizon kept moving away from us. It's like, so, but it's also when the French, some great French literature came over that was the existential literature. And so we started looking at the world from an existential point of view. And at the same time, we had Martin Luther King. We had an incredible explosion of music, rock and roll music, the Beatles, you name it. And most importantly, it was the beginning of a global peace movement. And so I just figured that, okay, folks, we got this far, and we got to do something about it. What are we going to do? Let's call it the end of the first human evolution. Let's look at what we're in now, which is suspended, because we've got the detritus of the first human evolution that we're still dealing with. Mm-hmm. We got the wars that are happening right now that we aren't really dealing with them because we're still fighting them. So, we're right here on the cusp between the first human evolution and this second human evolution that we still haven't even put our finger on. You've got the World Health Organization, phenomenal. The United Nations, phenomenal. All the nonprofit organizations, Bill and Melinda Gates, you name it. I mean, I have a nonprofit organization that for the 10 years that we were operating in Myanmar, I was so enthralled by all the nonprofit organizations that are out there all over the world doing good. We have already laid the groundwork in our organizations, our national, our multinational organizations, and our nonprofit organizations, even our churches, our religions, our synagogues, you name it. We've gotten to a point where we can look at this thing from a global point of view, because that's where we got to start. In my opinion, it's the Compassiviste. You have to have that. You have to understand your care for peace. You have to understand that that's yours. You already have it. And, there's a story behind that, like I can tell later, but to answer your question about this whole, what's the definition of the first human evolution, I got it. It's somewhere in between the, 50s and the 60s. We're in a period now where we haven't begun to plan the global second human evolution, because it has to be global, and the result has to be one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all, but not just one nation. It's one global nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. And that's what your job is. Your job is to start talking about this and get some of the terminology out there, which I learned over a 50-year period. And it's simple stuff. You don't have to go to college to learn how to plan. You have to learn how to listen, and you have to learn how to speak with people and get issues that might come in through opinions, but convert them into issues and get people to start talking about issues that are in the center here and not about their opinions. That's the disaster of issues. When people say, I believe in this, I believe in that, it's too late.
Right. You're right. You're absolutely right about that. And, again, I'm really happy that you're saying the things you're saying, because it comes back to me and it tells me, it fortifies what I'm doing. It empowers what I'm doing. It inspires what I'm doing, because I really do believe in what you're saying about we need to make this global this time, because we are too connected and we affect each other too much around the world to think of USA, England, or Germany, or Myanmar, or any other country as a this entity that is unaffected by the world. And with the environmental changes, with social issues, you really need to look at this from a more global perspective. I mean, just a quick example: Europe lately has been dealing with a rise of fascism, for example. And when you think about it, you cannot kind of isolate, a country, even a small country like Belgium, and say, "Oh, it's just the people just decided all of a sudden to become fascist." No, it's not the people. Some things must have triggered this. Then you need to kind of, broaden your horizon and say, what is affecting this rise in fascism? Why are people starting to accept this? And then you grow into Africa, you grow into migration, you grow into environmental issues, climate crises, all these other things, economic issues. And so all of these lead to each other. And then you realize why people are accepting that kind of rhetoric. And so, like you said, if people start talking about it and bringing those points out, it really builds into a conversation that can save us
Yeah,
from
yeah,
going the wrong ways.
yeah. And
Let's
I would. Oh, excuse me. Go ahead.
go ahead. No, you would.
But well, no, I was going to uh, dovetail here with what you're saying because I think that one of the things that we have to do in using the right words is avoiding using the wrong words. And the word fascist, for example, is a very highly loaded word. It has become an opinion based word rather than a definition. Because if you look at the definition of fascism, it's it's murky.
Mm-hmm.
It's something that is really more an opinion based word, and it's not going to help the discussion if we're talking about fascism. What we have to do is talk about things like overpopulation, overconsumption, overmilitarization, and overburdening the planet's resources. Okay, those are the issues. Is there any word fascism in that discussion? No, it's just not. You gotta. We've got to learn how to back up, and to back up is one of the reasons why I am now uh, very articulate or whatever about this whole idea of the first and the suspended and the second human evolution, because I'm asking people to back up. Let's back up and look at the whole trajectory of humanity from 2.5 million years ago to, another 2.5 million years if we're lucky. But look at where we are now in relationship into that timeline. There's there are so many different empires and organizations and you name it that are only in the last nth on that timeline, that those words just, it's irrelevant. And I think that the issue that the Holocene and the Anthropocene people are discussing is whether this period of humanity is an epoch or an
Mm-hmm.
era. And it's really just an event right now. It's not, it's neither of the two. So, you have to back up and look at this event that's called humanity and realize that, I mean, we're talking about between the mid 50s and the 60s. We're not
Mm-hmm.
talking about 1.5 million years ago. It's what we need to do is talk about the issues and avoid discussions that are opinion based discussions.
And you rightly say that, overconsumption, I find, is an issue. I try to, approach that with people a lot, because when I started the nonprofit side of Compassiviste as a movement of Compassiviste Foundation, I thought, what do we want to target here? What do we want to do through the nonprofit to make the world a better place, essentially, to help make the world a better place? And I thought, well, we could really, go to LA and say, deal with Skid Row and homelessness. We could go to any pocket of the world and try to help in that pocket. And then I thought to myself, well, even if we were so lucky to have all the funding and all the people and all the support to end poverty in a locality, what if a flood comes thereafter and just wipes out that entire locality with no homeless people in it? What was the point of doing that first bit? And so I thought, no, I'd have to incorporate overconsumption, the climate issues, the environmental, existential issues that we're facing today. Because you just said, if we're lucky. And, when people speak about the future and they throw in that if we're lucky, it kind of describes what they're thinking. It kind of tells me that they are aware of the dangers and the risks that we're facing going into the future, right? Because otherwise they wouldn't say that. Like you don't hear people in the early 1920s saying, if we're lucky to see the 50s, right? Because they weren't even anticipating a world war that would have possibly given them that thought. But then you look at some of the writings in the early 40s, and that conversation comes in all of a sudden. It's like, if we're lucky. And you saying that again, I pick up on that and I say, people are concerned about the environment. So we have to incorporate the environment into everything we kind of do. How do you, and that goes to, again, what you were saying about a global approach to the issues. Do you think that this is a conversation that you are bringing to the table as well within your work in a sense of the sustainable growth, the sustainable, resolution of the issues that we're facing?
I'm trying to deal with the next step. It's one thing to have these conversations, but what's the next step? And when it comes to healthcare, when I went to Myanmar, they wanted me to help them build a hospital in the big town Yangon, it's called Rangoon. And Myanmar used to be called Burma, by the way, for anybody. It's the country that's just to the left of Thailand, or to the right of India, or to the south of China. I mean, it's just, you can look it up, but most people don't even know where it is. And so when I went there to help them build a hospital, I looked at where they wanted me to build it, and they already have a bunch of hospitals, and they aren't even being used the way we utilize hospitals. They're more like boarding places. I mean, it's just for wherever anybody wants to pay for them. And so I went out and looked at the rural part of the country, and this gigantic rural area, which is most of the country. They didn't have a whole lot of rural health, but it wasn't just rural health that they didn't have. They didn't have community development. They didn't have business development. They didn't have, your word, sustainable processes. So that's when I said, okay, we got to build a community development and health center so that it's a place where this prototype clinic and community development health center would be built, and they could do their own thing. They could do anything they wanted. And what's happened is that the idea of having a clinic was far exceeded by the people there, because they have used the community development concept. They built a pond, and now we're growing crabs in these ponds to feed their livestock. I mean, I couldn't believe it, how far they've gone. And that's the whole point of sustainability. You have to give them the tools. And that's what we did. We gave them the tools, and then we got out of their leave. So
I'm going to make a highlight of exactly what you said here, because, again, I tell people, as a nonprofit, I want to collaborate. I want to help. I want to support the nonprofits who are doing exactly what you just said. Go in, give the people the resources, teach them how to use those resources, and get out. Because when you go in and you continuously bring aid and feed them and just tell them to sit there idly as you feed them and feed them and feed them, it's just not going to empower them. It's not going to fix the situation until the day you die. And then, the day you die, that society, that organization collapses, you leave, your organization leaves, and then those people are back to hunger and starve, like nothing happened, right? And so it's a real issue for me to explain to people exactly what you said. So I love that you're that much further than a lot of nonprofits, and you'd be surprised how many nonprofits don't think like you.
Oh, I wouldn't be surprised at all, because while we were doing our project there, we were not only visited by a nonprofit organization. They had tons of money, so they could send two of their people to see what we're doing in Myanmar. And they got on the airplane with us, and they flew all the way to Myanmar, got on the boat for 3.5 hours, hiked the hour and a half to this far off, deep rural area where we were building this clinic. And they were building a whole community in Ethiopia. And I was going, wow, this is really cool. We can learn from you. Well, guess what we learned? We learned that they ran out of money. And then the village that they were building ended up not being able to sustain anything except for whatever seeds fell from whatever bushes they planted. I mean, it was just because they didn't plan for getting the hell out of there. You got to say, look, I'm just here to give you the tools for the methodology to meet their needs. And so that's it. And then you got to leave and then watch them do it. It's awesome. Well, I've made more mistakes than anybody in the entire planet. So, when I say 50 years, the first 40 years was making mistakes everywhere, so that by the time I got to Myanmar, I didn't have to make the same mistakes. I made new mistakes, but we won't talk about that.
Okay. In that sense, let's talk about caring for peace. You say a lot of people are doing caring for peace, and I like how you make it an active verb, right? They're doing it. Mothers, nurses, teachers, so That's many right. people that you speak about are doing that. But then you bring up politicians, government, the spaces that aren't doing caring for peace. How are we going to move the needle there to make it a natural progression for these spaces to get into the action of caring?
It's a good question, because with everything, we have to start with ourselves. If we can't tap into what's already in our hearts, then it's going to be hard to say, well, I'm going to go to college and learn something so that I can do it. It's got to be right here before you're born, frankly. I was a hospital corpsman in the United States Coast Guard Reserves. During the Vietnam War, I was stationed in the San Francisco Bay, taking care of seamen who came back from Mekong Delta and all different places where the Coast Guard helped out during the war. And I was taking care of them. I mean, they had broken arms, broken legs, they had snake bites, you name it, all sorts of stuff. And I learned what it was that I already had in my heart, but I was not ever allowed to use it. And that's the ability to care with my hands. And here's all these guys that when I was in grammar school, remember, I was 19 years old, but in grammar school, all these guys, we were always fighting each other. We were beating each other up. We had, this post-World War son's attitude toward life, which is just fight, 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 fight. It's, we were the sons of World War II vets. And so all of a sudden, these same guys were on a bed, on a gurney, and they let their, whatever that was that they had in their brains down. And so I took care of them, and I felt the care being received from them. And it was such a monumental experience to me, because it was right there. I was caring for them. I was sewing things up and putting cat patches and gauzes and all that, sort of giving them shots, and but at the end of the day, I had this wonderful feeling, and I realized it wasn't just at the end of the day, it was also during this process of caring. What is this feeling? And the feeling was peace, not that one, not the one after the war, not on the mountain, looking down into the valley, this is peace that comes from caring. And that's where our nonprofit organization had a mantra, which is, through care, you can attain peace. Well, I thought I'd come up with this idea. Wow, I'm so smart. I figured this out until I met every nurse in the entire United States and all the nurses around the world who already knew what it meant to care for peace. And it was the reason why most of them were nurses. It's because they really, really were good at caring for peace. It was just so simple. You mentioned this, and you said, teachers have this feeling too. Anybody who takes care in some way of other people Heck, even my plumber son, he takes care of people. They have, a burst pipe or something. He goes in there and he helps them. He alleviates their pain and suffering.
Mm-hmm.
That's the most important thing that we have to recognize. We have to recognize what's already there in our hearts. Then we can start talking about what we're going to do about it.
At Compassiviste Foundation, in our nonprofit arm, the vision is a world without suffering. And is exactly through what you're saying, through the people who care actively to reduce suffering, that we're going to be able to minimize suffering. So it's a matter of empowering these people and empowering this thought process of how can I serve? How can I help? How can I care? Right? Having that discussion and then activating on that discussion. Now, you believe that health and medical institutions and healthcare can lead the way in this discussion. I mean,
Right.
nurses, they bring that ideology, I would call it even, to the table of care, care, care. And so, explain a little bit how you think we can achieve this, minimization of suffering through healthcare socially.
Well, your question earlier that I did not overlook. I just realized that, what do we do with the leadership of the world that
Mm-hmm.
they weren't nurses and they weren't teachers? How do we get them to the place? And I think a couple of things. First of all, you have to have, in any conscious movement, has to start with the unconscious that is already there. Okay, that's number one. Number two is we need to have our leaders be able to learn the language that our unconscious spoke into our consciousness. So we need our leaders to hear the people raise their hands at the town hall meeting and say, well, just out of curiosity, we're really in the suspended human evolution right now, and it doesn't sound to me as if we're really leaving the first human evolution, because we're doing things, and you're talking about us continuing to do things that come to us from the first human evolution that we really need to get away with. Okay, so somebody raised their hand at a town hall meeting to some politician up on the stage. What the heck is he going to do? And I think that the vocabulary, our terms, our words, that's what we have to share. And that's why I keep pointing to you, because you're somebody who can do this. You've got a breadth of audience. You said what you're in Europe, you're London. Okay, you live in London. So you've got Europe, and you've got, did you say South America?
South American and
part
North
of
America.
India. Wonderful. I mean, you've got an audience that is not the same audience as Trump's audience or Putin's audience. And you've got an audience that has an interest that is completely different from the politicians' audiences. That's fine. We got to get the audiences to start using the terminologies. Now, when I say, like first, second human evolution, I don't expect people to do that. I expect people to learn how to ask questions that will move the discussion towards a more global approach. That's it. And it's such a wide discussion topic that they don't have to remember first and second human evolution. Right. They just have to remember, well, no, wait a minute, we got a population problem, and you're talking about more children. Is that really the discussion that we need to have? Elon Musk has got 11 kids. So what you do is, okay, Elon, what about those people who are getting in boats on North Africa by the thousands to go to Europe? What about the people who were kicked out of Myanmar because they were Muslims, and now there's 1.5 million people in Bangladesh that are barely surviving, and it's only thanks to the World Food Program that they're alive. What about that? And so, get Elon Musk to start talking about global problems. So instead of talking about something that really comes from be fruitful and multiply conversations that occurred during the first human evolution. And and even get the churches and the religions involved with this discussions too, because they can't be looked at as if they don't think about what's going on today, that they just listen to whatever it was that they say that their scriptures, whatever they were, whatever religion it is, told them to do. Okay, now how do you reconcile what your religion says and allow that religious feeling and those religious important values stay as part of your values, your attitudes, your goals, and yet we also need to make sure that we deal with the problems of today and plan for the future. So these are the discussions that have to happen.
I find a lot of what you say comes through to me with an emphasis on education, because to have these discussions and to fuel these discussions and to make them mainstream discussions, we need to educate people to a level of understanding these from a perspective that you're explaining right now. You're now providing an education with what you're saying. And this podcast, this episode right now, will be educational in that way for people who are listening. They'll be like, wow, I never thought about it this way. I never thought about having these discussions. I never thought about reaching out from these angles. And now they'll say, I heard this, and let me rethink how I'm approaching the issues, right? How do we formally do this, though, in a sense? Because you do speak about global, and to have that global reach, to have that global appeal, should we perhaps review our education systems, or somehow, go into a place where we can actually educate the public to rise from this? Because I look at the education system today, and I see a lot of preparation for children to go into the labor force, but I don't see a lot of preparation for children to activate into a social world that can allow them to grow in that way. That education comes outside of the school hours. It comes in the ways they experience the world.
It's going to be difficult to get there from here. And the reason why I say that is because we are really trying to fix problems the way we would take a Model T and convert it into a Porsche. You can't take a Model T and convert it into a Porsche. It doesn't work. You got to design the Porsche. And I think that's one of the things that our goal comes from the bottom quote on the front cover of my book, which is the process is the solution. Okay, it's not it's not the system as a solution. No, the process is the solution, because we have to get to the point where we can actually have a process that is not bogged down by the past, but still can use past in our history to be able to do a better job. And my example is when I went to Myanmar after having made lots and lots of mistakes in all over the world, Curacao, Bahamas, Bahrain and the Persian Gulf, Nigeria, Kenya, where things didn't work out. I went to Myanmar and I said, okay, what is the process that we have to establish this time so that we have a better chance to succeed at the end, because the result of the process is where we want to get to. And the result might be a system, but we have to have a process first. And so I think that when it comes to education, we got to be thinking about the Porsche. There are some things that we're doing right now. In America, we have Common Core, which turns out, after I spent some time looking at it, it's a very good process. But a lot of people said, oh, it's communist. Oh, it's, but it's something that kind of works. But then again, it doesn't kind of work if you're going to still stick kids in chairs that are facing forward to one lecturer in the front, which is called a teacher, and you don't introduce an incredible Socratic process. If you don't look at Montessori schools and look at what was Summerhill in England, was a phenomenal project. We got to learn from the past, but we got to design a Porsche.
Hmm.
So when it comes to education of children, this is something that we need to do as part of the process being the solution to moving ahead forward. And, it's, and there's this whole thing about the population problem, you know, you, and you look at Florida, Florida is going to have to put a levee around the entire state if they want to even be up above the new definition of sea level. I mean, it's unbelievable. But we aren't looking at a global answer there. We're looking at a state example. Oh my gosh! So they're already putting levees around some communities in Florida, and they're building houses better because the tornadoes, their monsoons, are getting them. So yeah, I mean, education is just one of the many things that we are going to need to do as part of defining the process. We have not gotten anywhere near that yet. So just because
Mm.
I'm using these words doesn't mean, oh, I know what that means. Oh, we'll just start tomorrow. Believe me, we need a whole planning team, and it needs to be a global planning team. And it better not have a bunch of people who come in with an opinion. I don't want them there.
And you know what? I appreciate you saying that last sentence, because when I started Compassiviste, I tapped into a donor base of very, very wealthy people that I knew from before, from my previous life. And when I said this is what I want to do on a global scale, they exactly what you said. They came in with opinions, and they came in with kind of uh, tit for tat approach of, oh, I'll
Yeah.
fund this, but I want that. I'll fund this, but I want this. And I said, and I turned around and I said, but we can't do that. With all due respect, it's a lot of money that you're funding, but we can't do that, because if we did that, then it would reverse everything that we're working towards. And so we'd have to liberate this ideology here, not kind of confiscate it to your thought or what you want to do. This isn't a pet project. And so I lost a lot of people in that process, because, as you say, I was talking about a global revision, and they were thinking about how it would be advantageous to them to donate here. And so that's when I really turned to the community. That's when I really turned to the idea of,
Mm.
the things that worked, the Gandhi movement, the Martin Luther King movement, the Bolshevik Revolution, whatever you want to look at, good or bad, the ones that worked were the ones that riled the masses into kind of appreciating what process they were designing or they were bringing to the table. And so doing that makes it much more effective, I find, than to, buy the election through one person's efforts. And so, that was something I learned through my own experience as you're talking about it. Now, away from overconsumption, the path towards growth through conservation. I want you to speak a little about that, because a lot of people speak about sustainability, speak about the environment, speak about all these issues, but rarely do you see them speaking of overconsumption. And I think I know part of it is because, again, a lot of the funding is coming from a place where overconsumption fuels the mechanisms for which they become billionaires, and so you can fund other nonprofits to care for the environment. But when you really look at the major issue we're facing, it is overconsumption. I mean, we have so much waste, we have so much overconsumption, there's so much inequity and imbalance in consumption globally, because just like yourself, I've traveled, like, I've worked with the Masai in Tanzania, I've worked with people in Iraq, I've traveled to places where I noticed the difference in consumption and difference in conservation, and how they conserve day to day, all the energy that they conserve day to day, because everything matters, every grain matters. Versus when I'm in Canada, when I'm in Toronto, I go to the supermarket, there's overabundance. So, foods are going to waste because there's a scratch on them. And so, how do you think that we can deal with overconsumption, again, through education, through practice? I don't know where the power lies in explaining to people overconsumption is the issue.
I think it's difficult to uh, deal with just one issue without having a perspective of all the issues. This is part of my backup, see humanity, first human evolution, what the second human and suspended. If you look at overconsumption without looking at overpopulation and over overburdening the planet's resources, then you're going to start with right away with a narrow focus. And so, and this is the same thing when I was designing hospitals, and I'd have a radiologist come in and say, okay, I want the radiology department to have its own corridors. I don't want to have to use corridors from the rest of the hospital. And I want it to be a standalone inside the hospital. And here's a radiology department that's supposed to serve the emergency department, the medical surge floor, the ICU unit, and the outpatient building that is right next door to it. And the guy's saying he wants his own corridors. And this happened to me. So I had to get him roped into looking at hospitals from a global standpoint. Look at the hospital. So guess what? I took him to tours. And I think one of the things that we'll have to do with our global planning teams is have them fly around, look at some of these other countries. Because, Mark Twain was right. You can't be prejudiced if you travel. So you have to see everything and be able to put it together. So that's what I did with this radiologist, as well as a bunch of other people like the director of pharmacy, who wanted a pharmacy on every single floor. Oh my God, what am I going to do? Because there's a hospital that put pharmacy on every floor. The only problem is they had to have a pharmacist on every single floor. You want to start adding the money up here, and so, I'm using my background to help think about this problem called how are we going to plan? And you just gave me a perfect example, because we have to get these people, everybody in the planning team, to be able to back up and look at our human trajectory and look at where we've been. But in that hospital context, I took these people on the planning team for this hospital that we were going to build to other hospitals, big hospitals, small hospitals that were losing money hand over fist. Oh, very important. Wow, look at this. This hospital is losing so much money. When the admitting department person is finished admitting a patient, they follow the patient to the next place because there's no clerk at the next place. So they have to stay with the patient until the patient is being seen by the doctor. And I'm thinking, wait a minute, that's a pretty good idea. And so all of a sudden we learn from these other hospitals. So when we got back, guess what? The radiologist was designing his department with us, was designing the hospital with us, and he didn't have one unneeded internal corridor in his department.
Mm-hmm.
It was awesome. He was starting to look at what we call circulation. When we're talking circulation,
Mm-hmm.
is how the patients and the employees and materials move through the corridors to where they need to go. Circulation was a big issue, and we dealt with the problem, but we dealt it through a global education. And that ties into our other discussion earlier about education. We really have to have globalized education. And what I look at is the media can really help with this. The media, as in the world media. I don't have negative opinions. Yeah, there's some things we need to do to make our media a little bit more focused on global issues, but you aren't going to find me getting mad at ABC, NBC, and MSNBC or Fox News. No, these Fox News, we need to be able to take Fox News and make sure that they know what their responsibility is in explaining what's happening in the world and what we need to do. And I think that a positive state of mind is so important.
Yes.
It's just so important. And taking care of people. When I look at someone who's in struggle, I have in my mind, oh, this is one of my patients on the gurney. how can I take care of this person? When someone comes to me and is talking about fascism, which I've had several conversations lately with people who were talking about fascism, I imagine they're on the gurney because their sickness is something that is an epidemic, frankly. It's their inability to put aside the fear words, the hate words,
Mhm,
the
mhm.
scary words, and talk about the issues.
Being that we deal a lot with environmental issues, I used to get a lot of people coming to me and speaking about how we have to have a campaign that shuts down Nestle or Procter and Gamble and all of this. And I said, hold on, wait. Let's take this one step further. Why is Nestle a problem for you? And they say, oh, they're selling water in plastic bottles and the plastic in the oceans and the plastic everywhere. And I said, okay, who's buying those plastic bottles? And they say, the consumers. And I say, well, if the consumers stop buying the plastic bottles, what do you think Nestle is going to start doing? It's going to respond because it's a supplier that responds to demand. So Nestle isn't this evil corporation that's sitting out there saying, I want to end the world, and the best way to do it is to produce as much plastic as I can, and that's what I'm going to do. That's not what Nestle is doing. Nestle is just saying, everybody on the street wants a bottle of plastic bottle of water. I'm going to supply it to them at a price that is competitive enough that they'll buy my water over everything else. So if you want to change that and reduce the plastic, you don't want to target Nestle. Nestle is an organization that's very well equipped to switch from plastic to glass or any other recyclable mode that we would appreciate. All they need is for the demand to tell them that we're changing our systems. We're no longer buying plastic. Now we're doing this. And that comes on us, right? So if you remove the hate, if you remove the finger pointing, if you remove this idea of you're wrong, I'm right all the time, then you get into a place of having those conversations that change people. And I think a very good example of this happened in Rwanda. They had their, the genocide. And then now Rwanda is the safest country in Africa. And so how did that happen over the span of, under 30 years? And when you look at it, the people came together. There was a lot of forgiveness, and there was a lot of thinking of how do we even get into a place where we started just massacring each other? How did this happen? And so there was a lot of reconciliation. There was a lot of discussion. There was a lot of, pulling all these veils of hate back and coming to a place where people could meet and people could safely start to assume, what does prosperity, what does progress, what does security look like for our future, so that we can all grow together, all our kids can grow happily together. And in a very short span of 30 years, this happened to make Rwanda the safest country in Africa right now. And it's amazing. And the way they did it is to not take each other to court, not blame each other, not split the country in half between two ethnicities and say, we just can't see eye to eye. The collective came together and they viewed things from the way you're explaining. They viewed things from that perspective. I want to ask you, again, going back to terminology and the verbiage you use and kind of the language that you've created. Can you tell me what the difference between the sixth extinction and the second human evolution is for you? And are we in the sixth extinction right now? I mean, as organisms.
I was on a podcast about, I don't know, 6 months ago, where Amanda it was like the Sixth Extinction podcast. And I didn't know that when I started. I'm only doing podcasts with people who I believe are global podcasters or have a connection to something bigger. And the first thing I said to him was, I'm here to ruin your day because I don't even think about the sixth extinction. I think about the next step,
Mm-hmm.
And so if you'd like, we can continue talking about what I think is the next step, and then you can bring your thoughts in, and we'll start from there. Well, he said, yeah, sure, let's do it. And because sixth extinction is just not what the discussion is about, and we got things to do. We gotta. It's like the little kid in the classroom's raising his hand. The teacher says, wow, you really must like this subject. And the kid says, no, I got to go to the bathroom.
Mm.
You know, I mean, we got to focus on what we got to do right now. What's the next step? And that's the reason why I'm so focused on
Right.
the cover of my book says to care for peace, a global mandate to secure the second human evolution in perpetuity. That's the discussion. That is to care for peace, because that's requisite. You got to recognize that you got it in your heart. And the second human evolution is what we need to be doing right now. There's nothing about the extinction. I mean, I don't care. That belongs in the discussion of the Holocene and the Anthropocene.
Right.
Okay, go ahead and have fun talking about that. When you're ready to talk about the next step, just come on back. I'm ready to talk.
Right. Right. If you're willing to see yourself beyond that extinction space, and if you're willing to see yourself at an active space where you're doing something about it, that's where this conversation is. So
right.
And that's really empowering to the audience, because I think what everybody's going to take from this is stop looking at the fear factors and the negatives and all of the ways that we're going to die and all the ways that you're going to be extinct, and start thinking about what you can do about it and how you can do what you can do about it. And I tell people, even if all hope's gone, you're still breathing. You can still act. You can still do something, right? The valor is in your final act. How are you going to do your final act? If you really believe that, right? What's your final act? Is it going to be an act of an altruistic force of, changing the world for the better in that last moment that you have? Or is it going to be sulking and sitting there and being like, oh, I'm negative anyways, I'm just going to sit here?
Right.
So I really appreciate that you bring that kind of response and guide the audience into a place where act. And that's really what everybody's going to take from this conversation. They're going to take,
well, I hope so.
Your idea of care is act, which again, compassiviste, it's almost kind of, it's parallel. It's really parallel. And I love that. Now, how can the audience support Care for Peace, and where do people interact with you? How do you get involved with the work?
What did my mother ask? My mother-in-law asked me last night. She says, "Are you coming up with a significant headwind?" And I said, "Right now, there's no wind out there, because nobody on the other side can see me underneath. I'm in the foxhole over there, and nobody sees me, so they can't shoot at me." So I really, I don't know if this anywhere near answers your question, but it's just, I think we have a lot to talk about and a lot to do. And I'm not sure that we've gotten to the point where people can say, oh, can I give some money to you? Or I'm going to go buy your book. I don't even care if people buy my book. I'm giving them away. Okay. Yeah, it's on Amazon, but I did that so I could publish the book and give it to my friends. So, if somebody wants to actually go buy it, go ahead. It's worth buying just for the templates, because there's 4 templates in the back of the book that I created over the 40, 50-year period that will help you understand what it means to care for peace, and how that relates to the first and second human evolution, and how to look at how to plan for the second human evolution by thinking about where we've been and where we are now, and kind of putting a little marker on where you think we are now, and then saying, oh my God, we have a long way to go. Oh, we have not that long a way to go on this issue. Oh, we got a real long way to go on this issue. So I guess, what can people do? I don't know. Sure, go ahead and buy the book. I apologize. I'm going to make 25 cents. Wow. I don't know what I'm going to do with that money. But because the templates are in the back of the book, somebody actually sent me a $20 bill and saying, would you take those templates and put them on some cardboard and so I did. It cost me a printing thing on my computer, and I made it into a, what was it? I put a marble background and, flipped it over. Oh, I think I have a copy. I have a copy somewhere here. Oh, yeah, there you go. See,
okay.
These are the templates. And so I packed them up, and now I've had 3 people Wow, that's a lot of people, isn't it?
You know what? I want to get a copy of those too, because I want to start that conversation and get
Uh,
people involved in that, and maybe through our website and the educational part of it, we can add those in there and get people kind of
hey,
retrieving them. And
send me your address and no
yeah,
$20. Just send me the. I'll get them for you.
perfect. Thank you very
So,
much.
yeah, because I think that if people have a tool, and that's really what these
Yes,
are. These are
yeah,
tools
too.
for, there. Let's see which one. There's 4 templates. Uh, the first one is just the prime directive for myself. There
Hmm.
you go, right there. And then the second one is the relational template, our prime directive. You know, with our relationships. That's that one right there. And
Mm.
then the third one is a cultural, and all this stuff has to do with looking at the first human evolution as I describe it and put it in your own words. I mean, that's what I tell everybody. Look, sure, I came up with these words for the first human evolution, but if you can think of something else, not only change it, but send me an email and tell me how I should change it. I will, because Care for Peace on the organizational, I have the value with ourselves as supremacy. But
Hmm.
second human evolution is diversity. Now, you could
Hmm.
take a marker and you can say, okay, supremacy, yeah, we had the Corleone family, kill everybody who was getting in their way. So that's way over on the supremacy side. But what are we doing in now? We're going to diversity. Okay, how are we doing diversity? Well, we've got regulations and we're making sure that we deal with monopolies a little bit
Hmm.
better. And, so we're just moving in the right direction on so many levels. I can't help but be very, very positive about the direction the world is going. I just want to make sure that our world has the tools for planning. And that's really what my book is about. It's the tools for planning. It's the pre-planning phase. When I was working in hospitals, working for teams that were designing new projects, by the time the architect got there, I needed to go. I didn't really need to be there. I was a facilitator of the planning process. That's really what I'm doing now. I'm facilitating the planning process. If someone's told me that I had to be in charge of the planning process, you'd see me run for shelter. I'd be running to the bomb shelter or to the cyclone shelter in the Midwest, because that's not my expertise. My expertise is getting this conversation started. That's it. And I'm really enjoying doing it, just uh, because it's something I know how to do. Why do something I don't know how to do? I mean, that's Trump's job. He's doing something he doesn't know how to do. Yeah. Yeah. And we will
Yeah.
support him, by the way. We will support
Mhm.
him. We will, I mean, he's seeking progress in his definition of progress. And, okay, so, let's get with it. Let's get with him
Yeah. Yeah, I
because
guess,
he's
looking at it from the way you express not using fascism and using ways of understanding the issues, I guess here we won't use MAGA or Trumpism, but we'll
yeah,
look at how we can progress together through the issues,
exactly.
right? And that's
Exactly.
beautifully said.
I mean,
Beautifully
yeah.
said. And on that positive note, I want to thank you, Jeffrey Charles Hardy. People remember that name, for speaking on Compassiviste Dialogues. And thank you for your wide range of compassionate health. And I would call it spiritual service and leadership, because that is what it is. It is what it is. People take spiritual as you have to be some guru on an island with a cult or something it's not. It's just people who are helping us, advance. And that was what religion was about. When religion started, it tapped into your spirituality, it tapped into your heart, and not just your brain and your mind, and
Yeah,
kind of
yeah,
try to bring compassion together and try to lead. Now, whatever happened over the centuries, that's a different conversation. But the idea, the base of religion was that. And so spirituality is really the
yes,
dealing for me of
yes.
people who bring that to the table. And I consider you a spiritual source, because you bring
Thank
that
you.
to the table when I speak with you. And,
Yes,
and over the decades of your experience, you've put it all together. You thought, how do I put all the 50 years of this experience and do something that can help the world and care for the world
Amen.
actively? And it is, people like yourself who wholeheartedly dedicate themselves to social progress, in a sense, that make the difference between, that whole thought process of annihilation and extinction and everything, and hope and thinking about the future and having the tools and the thought processes of, I never thought about that. From this angle, things look brighter. And you're really bringing that to the table. So I love it.
In closing, allow me to share one sentence that is the first sentence of the book,
Mhm.
and it is very simple. And this is for your listeners to ponder as they think about our conversations, if they got that far, right?
Mhm.
But the first sentence is this: to care for peace may not be the secret of living, or maybe the secret of life, but it's as close to the secret of living there is. Let me say that correctly. To care for peace may not be the secret of life. You would say, what's the secret of life? It may not be the secret of life. But it is as close to the secret of living there is.
Beautifully said. To our audience, please subscribe to Compassiviste Dialogues channel and share this episode so we can get this conversation off the ground and progress. Follow us on social media. All links to Jeff Hardy, his book, Care for Peace, and Compassiviste are listed below. We're here to help change the world together. I'm Ali Horia.